Staff and everybody in the room. We're for financial institutions and insurance. So at this point, I call the meeting to order. Do we have any requests for bill introductions at this point? Okay, if not, we'll be ready to open. Got a short list today, so this shouldn't take too awful long. We have a hearing on Senate Bill 26. And Eileen, if you would be in favor of doing the overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Senate Bill 26 amends KSA 40-3203 and pertains to a change in the documents required of a health maintenance organization, an HMO, and Medicaid provider organizations, or MPOs, when applying for a certificate of authority to provide health care in the state. So when an HMO or MPO applies for a certificate of authority, they do so by completing an application and by providing certain documents. These required documents are listed in subsection B of the bill in paragraphs 1 through 12. But broadly, these documents fall into a number of categories, such as organization and governance of the organization, business practices, contracts, how medical records will be received or maintained rather, proof of insurance, and then certain documents that demonstrate the financial soundness of the organization. So Senate Bill 26 would make a number of changes to the documents required to establish financial soundness. These amendments appear on page 2 of the bill in paragraph 7. I did summarize those for you in the chart that's on today's bill brief. So under current law, an HMO or NPO is required to provide financial projections in conformity with statutory accounting practices for a minimum of 3 years from the anticipated date of certification, and then on a monthly basis from the date of certification through 1 year. That would be amended to financial projections in conformity with statutory accounting practices for a minimum of 3 years from the date of application. And that change appears on page 2 in line 25. Then, if under current law, if the HMO or MPO is expected to incur a deficit, projections are going to be made or shall be made for each deficit year and for 1 year thereafter. And that's going to be amended to projections shall be made for each deficit year and for 1 year after, up to a maximum of 5 years. And that change occurs on page 5, line 28. Under current law, all financial projections shall include monthly statements of revenue and expense for the first year on a gross dollar as well as a per member per month basis, with quarters consistent with standard calendar year quarters. And that, under the bill, that requirement would be eliminated. Under current law, all financial projections shall include quarterly statements of revenue and expense for each subsequent year after the first. And that's going to be amended to just statements of revenue and expense for each year. That's on page 2, line 33. Under current law, a quarterly balance sheet is required, and that would be amended to a balance sheet for each year. The bill also makes a number of technical changes throughout the bill to conform to current drafting practices. Examples of this include making health care as 2 words into 1 word, the infamous witch hunt, where we ensure that the word witch is being correctly used and replace it with that. Have to specify what kind of witch hunt that is. And then how we designate cross-references to subsections and statutes, and you can see that on page 1 in line 11. And just as an aside, there's one last thing I wanted to mention. Yesterday, there was a discussion about the definition of person used in Senate Bill 18, and it listed the number of entities that were subject to the jurisdiction of the commissioner. And then I made this statement that we use definitions that are different in different statutes or acts. So this statute that we're working on today, 404203, is part of the health maintenance Organization Act. The definitions actually appear in a different statute. It's KSA 403202. And for use in this act specifically, the definition of a person is any natural or artificial person, including but not limited to individuals, partnerships, associations, trusts, or corporations. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention as an illustration of yesterday's comment. And with that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions.
Committee, do we have any questions or comments? Eileen, you do such a good job that it's just hard to come up with a good question. Thank you. Okay, at this point, we will have proponents, and the first one on the list is Eric Dury, Director of Government and Public Affairs, Kansas Insurance Department. Eric, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric Turk here with the Kansas Insurance Department. I have to concur with the chairman that Eileen does such a good job that she almost stole all my testimony here. Principally, this bill is an item on our legislative agenda to and simply, this just simplifies the HMO application process for them to transact business here in the state of Kansas. Currently in law, they must supply financial documents, but also financial projection documents too. These do include complex monthly statements of revenue and expenses, quarterly statements of revenue, expenses in subsequent years, quarterly balance sheets, and so we are just moving, the bill just simply moves these all to annual. Let's see, on page 2, I'm looking for the specific section here. I was just going to add that, if there's ever anything that the department needs to further review from these HMOs or prospective HMOs, we do have the authority to do that. So there's not much else I can further underscore, Mr. Chairman, but I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Eric. Do we have any questions from the committee? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, and thank you, Eric, for that testimony. It sounds like a good idea to reduce some of that paperwork and bureaucracy. One caution, though, is we've had some providers out there that have come into question that might not have been, if we don't have more frequent updates about what's going on in the books, if we don't have as much transparency, if we don't have a preview of some of those quarterly statements to make sure that they are solid and they're going to be the best providers for some of these Kansas services that we sometimes have a challenge with our providers, quite frankly. Are we risking not getting enough transparency by going to just an annual basis?
Sure. So what I'll add is our financial surveillance division. When HMOs apply for the certificate, most, if not all of the HMOs, because of the language in law, it's very confusing. We get questions almost every single time on the application, and if we don't receive questions from them, they send us these documents, and we end up having to request additional documents anyway. So principally, this is it's really just a cleanup. That's really all I'll say about that. If you look at page 2, line 23 to 25, and then additionally 30 to 32, that's principally the big change here, just monthly statements. But we're happy to have that conversation.
Anyone else? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation today, Mr. Turek. So we're going from what appears to be a lot of accountability from the industry to less, from quarterly to a year, and I kind of get, the balance between, the opportunity for business to do the business that they are engaged in versus, accountability for that and transparency. Was there a study done or some other information about why the change and why the less reporting?
Sure. So this idea came internally from our department because we get so many questions from these HMOs on, can you clarify this specific statute? Principally, that's it. I will add and maintain that we still can request more information if the department determines that revenue and expense statements aren't sufficient for their application.
Was there any effort to clarify the part of the statute that HMOs were finding confusing when they were submitting their reports?
That is a good question. I don't have an exact answer for you on that right now. I can get you that answer.
Well, I just know that there's, well, it seems, we want to make sure that we're transparent in our insurance industry, as in all industries, and it can be a confusing area for patients as well. That's not what this bill addresses, but so just want to make sure that it's prudent to change from quarterly to a year. And are most reports submitted fine, or?
Sure. What I'll say is, yes. You're talking about the initial application that this outlines here? Are you talking about like the documents that are needed to?
Well, you had said HMOs are confused. Is that a high percentage or low percentage? And again, just can we clarify the statute? Just want to make sure, Mr. Chair, and to the department that this is something prudent and that Kansans will be adequately protected in their interactions with the industry.
Sure. So yeah, I will reiterate that that this is only for HMOs that are not. They don't have a certificate of authority yet in Kansas. So this is just about the application process for them to receive that certificate to then transact business. So
operate in
yes.
Kansas.
So this is before they can even do any of that. So in terms of transparency, I will also, I did mention how the confusing aspect our director of financial surveillance has stated that we get innumerable calls from HMOs asking about this specific statute. So that's our core mission here, is to just simplify this process for them, so without losing the integrity of the application process.
And perhaps open it up for more competition for more HMOs to operate in Kansas. Is that kind of the thought as well?
The prime thought here is to just completely simplify the process for any applicant here.
Thank you for your answers, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Eileen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to provide some additional insight into kind of the overview and the accountability as far as an HMO or an MPO to the public. And I just wanted to point out, as part of the Health Maintenance Organization Act, it's important to look at all the statutes within the act because it provides the framework for the entire organization of the oversight, I guess. And under 40-3220, it requires an HMO or an MPO to annually provide an annual report verified with the commissioner showing its condition on the last day of the preceding calendar year and forms provided by the commissioner. And it includes the financial statement, including balance sheet and receipts and other information relating to the performance of the organization. So it's not just once at the time of application that the organization is examined. It is on an ongoing basis.
Senator Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm guessing this will be like a bank, except we're extending out, if you're in good shape, the examination to a year. Only problem with that is I watch too much YouTube and Warren Buffett, and your financial statements have everything that's really going on. In a year, a lot can happen. Now, I would assume before we would have someone on a year financial statement, there would be a level of performance. If not, then I would want to at least monitor them. I would want to make sure these companies are performing at a pretty high level, because if they're getting sued, anything like that, that's part of their disclosure, and now you're not getting that but once a year. That's a big deal.
Mr. Chairman, what I'll say, Senator Olson, is this does not preclude the department from examining them and investigating anything along those lines. This is just for the initial application process, and it also does not preclude the department from looking further. So,
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Mr. Turk. Oh, we got one here. Senator Gossage.
Thank you. Not a question as much as a comment, and I do want to say that I can imagine on line 23 going from the anticipated date of certification on a monthly basis from the date of certification throughout 1 year to from the date of application certainly clarifies. I just want to compliment them on that. Makes much more sense.
Thank you, Senator Gossage. Is there anyone else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Turk. Is there any other proponents on this issue? Is there any other opponents? Anybody neutral? Okay, then I will close this hearing. And do we have any other announcements from the committee or committee information? Okay, if not, we're adjourned.